the Nike Metcon 6 versus the Nike React Metcon Turbo. So right off the bat, I genuinely enjoy training in both of these models for slightly different things. But if you're on the fence between these two, three major differences that I think are worth noting are: number one, the outsole construction. So the Nike Metcon 6 has a slightly more consistent outsole. It's very flat, very grounded, and it's a similar structure to the format of the React Metcon Turbo when it comes to the overall rubber that Nike uses. The forefoot rubber is slightly more accommodating, very grippy, while the heel is slightly firmer. Over here on the Nike React Metcon Turbo, similar format once again to the Metcon 6, slightly firmer rubber back here on the heel, slightly more accommodating rubber up here on the forefoot. Now the major difference is this midfoot material. So we have a rubber material here that causes some disassociation between the forefoot and heel, provides a lot of maneuverability to the shoe, doesn't really take away from stability, but it's definitely very different than the Metcon 6 if that's what you've been wearing, or even the Metcon 5 or 4 if that's what you're currently rocking. The second construction difference that I think is worth noting is the upper construction. So over here on the Metcon 6, we have a slightly more breathable mesh. You can literally see my fingers through this forefoot material. We have some synthetic layers throughout the outskirts here for durability purposes and a bit more structure to the heel. On the React Metcon Turbo, we have a mesh that's very breathable on the lateral side. We have some synthetic layers that come up on the big toe and throughout the midfoot, and we have a more knit-like material on the medial side. We have a heel that is slightly less structured than the Metcon 6. So overall, this shoe feels very athletic in nature, feels almost like a track shoe or like you're wearing a sock in some respects, and it's very different than the kind of more structured material used in the Metcon 6. The third difference that I think is worth noting is the insole construction of these shoes. So in the Metcon 6, we have an insole that has that split between it when it comes to firmness. So up here in the forefoot, slightly more responsive and reactive cushioning, whereas the heel, slightly more firm. Plus the Metcon 6 comes with those hyper lifts, which can elevate the heel for various lifting purposes. In the Nike React Metcon Turbo, we have the Nike React insole, which is slightly more responsive, and that's why they're kind of marketing this shoe towards the hit market, also the lifters that want a shoe for plyometrics, agility, and everything else. Overall, both of these insoles I think are plenty stable, and I don't think they're really gonna impact a lot of performance when it comes to stability, but they are very different in nature, so I wanted to draw some attention there. But now let's talk on performance, because I think that's what most people are interested in. So when it comes to performance for both of these models, I'm just gonna outright say that I genuinely enjoy training in both. Now, I do have slight discrepancies between them. So let's talk about lifting first. So when it comes to lifting, from an overall stability point of view, both of these shoes are going to be solid. The Nike Metcon 6 has a nice stable insole, stable midsole and outsole construction, really keeps you grounded, flatter outsole. Plus there's a 4mm heel to toe drop, which is fantastic for just giving you a nice stable base to lift on. Plus these come with the hyper lifts, which you can insert to bump up the heel height for various lifting activities. Now in the Nike React Metcon Turbo, the insole is slightly more responsive, but I do not think that truly takes away from the stability in this shoe. Or at least, I don't think a lot of people are gonna be lifting enough to where they're actually gonna notice any impact on stability in this shoe. So overall, Nike hasn't listed a heel to toe drop in this model. However, it feels very similar to the 4mm offset in the Nike Metcon 6. So I would guess it's probably around 4mm. Plus, we have the stable outsole, pretty stable midsole, and overall, this shoe is plenty stable under a variety of lifts. Now, from a plyometric and agility point of view, I actually prefer the Nike React Metcon Turbo. So in my review of this model, I mentioned that it feels very similar to the Nike Metcon 4. If you ever worn a Nike Metcon 4, it feels very athletic, almost like if you've ever worn a track shoe. It feels similar to that. It hugs the foot really well, feels almost like a sock, and this shoe I think excels at hit workouts, agility focused movements, plyometrics, because we have the Nike React insole, which gives it a nice little layer of responsiveness, but the disassociation between the forefoot and the heel here adds a lot of maneuverability in this shoe, especially when it comes to jumping, getting up on the toes, being fast on the toes, for that matter, moving laterally backwards or forward. It doesn't really matter. This shoe is pretty phenomenal for those activities. Now the Nike Metcon 6, nothing bashing it on that category. It will perform very well for you when it comes to plyos and agility focused work. However, it is a slightly heavier shoe and the heel is not nearly as responsive as like the whole insole of the React Metcon Turbo. I think this shoe is much more forgiving when it comes to jumping more often or doing like longer sessions where you are doing a lot of bounding activities. Now, let's talk about on a day-to-day basis and shorter run basis. I'm not gonna talk about longer runs because truthfully, I don't think either of these shoes are that great for longer runs. Personally, I would not rock either of these models for more than 3 miles, just because like I think there are better options out there for the specific task of running, and that's not what these are really designed for. So on a day-to-day basis, both of these shoes are okay. When we have a very stable cross trainer like the React Metcon Turbo and the Metcon 6, generally they are not the most comfortable to wear for longer periods, but they will get by just fine. And on a shorter run basis, once again, they will get by just fine. Now, I do think that the Nike React Metcon Turbo is slightly better when it comes to shorter runs, because if you are a 4-foot runner, for example, these feel really good. Plus the React insole provides a little bit of a beefed up responsiveness compared to the Metcon 6. So when it comes to a day-to-day and shorter run basis, both of these models will work. However, I think for shorter runs, the React Metcon Turbo is a slightly better model, and that kind of falls back to how this shoe fits more athletically. As for sizing and fit, I think in both of these models, you should be fairly safe going true to size. However, they are slightly more narrow shoes. So the Nike Metcons are typically slightly more narrow through the midfoot, and if you do have a slightly wider or flatter foot, you may want to go up a half size. But if you are fairly true to size in most of the models you've worn, or if you've worn Metcons before, go true to size. I think that's gonna be your best bet. All right, so as for price for these two models, the Nike React Metcon Turbo is sitting around $150 USD, which is, in my opinion, way too much for a training shoe, but that's besides the point. The Nike Metcon 6 is $130 USD. Now I will say, since the Nike Metcon 6 has been out in the market a little bit longer, you could probably shop around and find some older colorways that have been discounted a little bit, so I would definitely recommend doing that if you are on a budget. But price-wise, React Metcon Turbo is $20 more, $150 I spent for this shoe. I'm still annoyed by it. I have so many training shoes, I cannot afford $150 USD for a training shoe. That's like 12 or 13 bowls at Chipotle. All right, we're moving on. Let's talk about construction. All right, guys, now let's talk construction of these two shoes because there's a lot to take in here. So in the Metcon 6, we have an outsole that wraps up, similar to the Nike React Metcon Turbo. They're somewhat similar. Metcon 6 has a slightly smaller lip here, but overall, I haven't sensed any issues with durability or lipping in these shoes. Now, when it comes to the upper construction, there's this breathable mesh material here in the Metcon 6. You can literally see my fingers through it. And we have some synthetic layers around the outskirts. Good thing for durability overall. On the React Metcon Turbo, we have a split like asymmetrical upper. So we have like a more breathable mesh on the lateral side, then synthetic material here, which is good for toe drag and stuff, and a knit. So overall, very, very, very different upper constructions, as you can see. Like there's a lot going on between these two models. Now making our way up to the eyelets, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a 6 for lace locking here on the Metcon 6. On the Nike React Metcon Turbo, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 eyelets going up. Overall, the lacing systems are pretty different. Once again, we have some fly wire here in the Metcon 6. The React Metcon Turbo has like an inner layer here on the medial, which has like a double beefed up material here, so it protects very well for durability. Personally, I'm a big fan of that. Both models have Nike branding on the lateral outskirts of the shoe. Now, looking at the actual midsole and outsole that wraps around the forefoot and midfoot. So in the Metcon 6, we have a slightly more consistent outsole that wraps up and midsole construction. So we have this bigger, thicker medial and lateral rubber wrap for rope climbing. On the React Metcon Turbo, we don't have that to the same degree. This is more of like a rubber-ish / plastic material that goes up on the medial lateral side. And the forefoot up here has this more like triangular, like angled construction similar to the heel in the React Metcon Turbo and the Metcon 6. So I think they did that probably to increase your ability to really ground the forefoot in the shoe, since it does fit slightly more narrow. Plus there's like this disassociation here throughout the midfoot. I'm sure they did that to just increase the overall ground contact that you can make with the foot. Making our way to the heel, both of the boots are fairly lower. Now what's interesting is that as I wear the React Metcon Turbo more, it's starting to actually stretch a tiny bit and form fit my foot a little bit better, which honestly I'm kind of enjoying right now. But when it comes to overall structure, Metcon 6 has a slightly more stable structured boot back here. Both are plenty stable, haven't noticed any heel slip issues in either of them. But when it comes to overall boot structure, the Metcon 6 kind of takes the edge here. Making our way to the actual heel construction, so we have a plastic heel wrap on both. The Metcon 6 wraps all the way around. The React Metcon Turbo limited the material to just kind of the posterior side and slightly on the lateral side of the shoe. They said that they did that to limit the overall weight of the model, which is true because this shoe is a lighter weight model. Making our way to the outsole. In the React Metcon Turbo, we have the sticky rubber up here, sticky rubber back here. This is slightly firmer rubber versus this. Not really a huge difference in my opinion when it comes to stability. The midfoot has a disassociation, so there is a break between the consistent rubber materials here. In the Metcon 6, it's a bit more consistent throughout. Not really much of a difference when it comes to just the overall structure of it. This is the firmer rubber back here, slightly less up here. And then we talked about this in the differences section, but I'm gonna show you guys once again. We have slightly different insoles. So for the Metcon 6, we have the slightly more stable heel versus cushioned forefoot to provide a little bit more versatility on top of the stability that comes along with the Metcon 6. Then in the React Metcon Turbo, we have the Nike React insole. So this is pretty consistent throughout. Now I will say there is this little lip here throughout the midfoot that is a bit more stable. Personally, I think that's a good addition because with the disassociation between the heel and the forefoot in this model, I think they definitely needed this material to add a little bit of structure there for folks who may want more structure throughout the midfoot. Also, something to note is the tongue construction. So over here on the Metcon 6, we have a slightly more round slash thick material, great for durability. Never really any issues when it comes to pulling this one on. On the React Metcon Turbo, we have a thinner tongue that has this split. Be very careful when pulling this on. Use two hands to pull it on because trust me, you don't want to rip this material up here because at the end of the day, $150 for a training shoe is not cheap. But overall, guys, those are the major construction takeaways with these shoes. If you have any questions or if you think I missed anything, please hit me in the comments below. I would love to answer anything you got that I might not have covered. All right, guys, that wraps up my review of the Nike Metcon 6 versus the Nike React Metcon Turbo. Personally, I think both of these models are gonna be stellar when it comes to lifting. For agility, plyometrics, and HIIT workouts, if you are somebody that biases your training towards those activities, I think you might like the React Metcon Turbo more. And from a day-to-day wear and shorter run basis, both models will be okay. The React Metcon Turbo might be a little bit better, but I would definitely also factor in price when it comes to these shoes because they are definitely not the most budget-friendly models on the market, as I've hopefully made pretty dang clear. But guys, as always, if you have any questions or if you're thinking about investing in either of these models, hit me in the comments below, ask whatever you got. And as always, drop a like to this video, drop subscribe to the channel. I'll see you guys in the next one.